Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson from Hudson, Wisconsin, and the legal and government host for Western Wisconsin Journal. Today, our guest is Representative Adam Jarchow.
Thanks for having me.
I did pronounce that correctly,
You
right?
got it.
Okay.
You did.
Now, Adam, you're a little bit new to parts of our viewing audience because you represent the 28th District, correct?
I do.
And so why don't we start with a little bit of background, where you're from, where you went to school, and your family.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I grew up in Clear Lake, so I'm a proud Clear Lake warrior. Went to undergraduate, got a finance degree at the University of South Florida, law degree at the University of Florida. Met my beautiful wife, Barbara, while I was in undergrad. We got married, lived in Florida for a little while, practiced law there, and then we moved back here about a decade ago. We have 4-year-old twins, Bo and Megan. They started school this year at Unity. I live up between Amory and Balsam Lake. And when they started school, my wife and I bought a small campground near our home. So that's what she does. She runs our campground. And I bought my dad's business that he started about 30 years ago over in Clear Lake. And so I sort of practice law a little bit and run that business. And my wife runs her small business.
Okay. So you were with a New Richmond law firm, right?
I was. Yeah.
Until when did that change? I guess.
Oh, about 2 months ago. I went out on my own when I bought the small family business.
Okay. And then what's that business do?
It's called Industrial Safety, so we sell and service safety equipment.
Okay.
And fire equipment for firefighters.
Fire and safety equipment. Okay.
I'm a volunteer firefighter, so
I
it's
guess
kind
we
of a
didn't
natural fit.
cover that when we were off camera, and I, had run into you at bar function, so I didn't realize you had left the Bocke Norman law firm. But how long were you there?
Since I moved back, so almost 10 years, 9 years I think I was there.
Okay, so 9 years with that law firm. And any specialty area of law that you practiced?
Yeah, I do business transactions and commercial real estate, so mostly transactional work. Every once in a while I'll end up in court in like a land use type dispute on a variance or a conditional use permit or something like that, but that's pretty rare. 90% of my work is outside of court work.
Okay, and the land use dispute, so forth, that's kind of a segue into the areas since being elected. Where have you focused your energy and your time as far as either writing legislation or co-sponsoring?
Well, I think it's been a variety of different things, but I would put them into 3 boxes. So one of them is sort of sportsman and Second Amendment rights. So I'm the author of a bill called the Right to Hunt Act, which we passed last session. Had a report from a number of sportsmen across Wisconsin that were being harassed by literally an eco-terrorist. A convicted eco-terrorist had found his way to Wisconsin and had a group that were harassing these hunters. We spoke with law enforcement and local DNR wardens, and our hunter harassment law was just not quite crafted well enough to work for them. And so we updated that hunter harassment law, called it the Right to Hunt Act, passed it with strong bipartisan support, and got that signed into law last year. So that's kind of bucket number 1 is sportsmen and Second Amendment rights. Bucket number 2, I would say, is small business type things, regulatory issues. So I was the author, along with Evan Goyke, of the new Partnership Act that we passed last year. I just had a bill signed into law by the governor this year that updates our business corporation law in order to allow virtual shareholder meetings. So sort of streamlining business and the way business operates has been the second bucket that I'd work on. And the third bucket is homeowner rights, property rights. So last session passed a couple of pretty significant property rights bills. This session we came back and passed what's called the Homeowners Bill of Rights that was just signed into law by the governor. Again, strong bipartisan support on that Homeowners Bill of Rights that we got passed. I think even in the state Senate we only had a handful of Democrats that voted no. So really proud that we worked with the stakeholders and were able to get bipartisan support on those pieces of legislation.
So just taking those buckets then, on the sportsman and right to hunt, is there areas where we need to strengthen the laws in Wisconsin to protect hunters or gun rights? Well,
we're always continuing to work on those. So today, actually, a bill that I'm a co-author of had a hearing in the Assembly. And it's a small bill, but hunters in Wisconsin that hunt with dogs have to carry their dog tags on their person. And so the problem with that is you forget, right? So your dogs are are tagged and all of that kind of stuff, but you forget to carry the tag along and you end up with a citation. So a small change to make it so you don't actually have to have that. You just have to present it to the department at some point within a few days if you didn't have it at that point. So we're always kind of tinkering with it. We got rid of the back tags last year. So and this year on the Second Amendment, we're doing constitutional carry. I'm a co-sponsor of that bill. So there's always room for improvement, I think, both on sportsmen's issues and on Second Amendment rights.
And then small business regulatory, anything there that is, I guess I should back up because we're talking about the different areas that you've focused your energy, but where have you served on committees since you got into the legislature?
Sure, yeah. On the Energy and Utilities Committee, I'm the vice chair of the Financial Institutions Committee, Tourism, and there's a committee called the Joint Review Committee of Criminal Penalties.
Okay. And criminal penalties, one thing that I see, virtually every session is that there's always something that makes it more strict against either drunk driving or sex crimes or along those lines. Is there anything in the works there, or is there something more recent?
Yeah, there's a number of those bills that are pending in the legislature. It's always tough to tell. I think there's somewhere over 1,000 bills that can get introduced in every legislative session. So it's always tough to tell which bills will end up having some traction, but there are a number of bills that would strengthen drunk driving penalties. There are a number of bills particularly dealing with human trafficking. Of course, we've been working on this heroin and meth epidemic through the HOPE agenda and some other bills, and I think we'll continue to work on those kind of issues. And so those are pretty important. There's a package of bills that Senator Vukmir has proposed. There's a crime issue in Milwaukee and outside of Milwaukee, and so they're proposing a package of bills that would strengthen criminal penalties in a number of different crimes. We just passed something a couple weeks ago when we were in session. I guess we're almost a month ago, to put the victims' rights statute into the Constitution. So in order to change our Constitution, we have to pass it in 2 consecutive legislative sessions, and then it goes to the voters. So always some work to be done on those issues.
Sure. Okay. I was trying to take notes and keep up. So how many committees then are you currently on?
I think I'm on 4 of them.
4. All right. So we had the criminal sanctions, the financial institutions, energy, and what was?
Energy and Utilities and Tourism.
Tourism, all right. Yeah, what about tourism then? Is there examples there of things? I know that tourism and tax policy can sometimes conflict. Mm-hmm. State of Florida, which is where you lived for a while anyway, they tend to, I think they don't have any income tax there.
Correct.
But they also have a sales tax that's like 11% in some areas. And being the idea is try to get some of that out-of-state money and funding their government programs. Is that something that you would envision for Wisconsin?
I don't think I think Florida is a completely different example than Wisconsin. I mean, they have, half the state of Wisconsin seems to go to Florida at some point or another during the winter. So we have a little bit of a different tourism economy. We have a more local tourism economy where we have a lot of people from Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, who visit us particularly to visit our lakes. So raising that tax rate to lower the other rates, I think, we could raise it to some extent, and that might make sense. We actually have one of the lower sales tax rates in the Midwest and nationally. So we could move that around a little bit to raise the sales tax rate if you're lowering the other tax rates, and there's actually a committee working on that right now in the Assembly to kind of do some what you generally call tax reform. So that would close some loopholes, hopefully broaden the base and lower the rates is kind of the plan.
Okay. So, in general, what is, obviously first in this special election, because we should remind the viewers that this is a special election for the seat that Senator Harsdorf held, and before her, I think it was Senator Klausing, and before her, it was Senator Harsdorf. So it was Sheila's brother, and now that Sheila is the Secretary of Department of Agriculture and Trade and Consumer Protection, that created the opening in the seat. And it didn't seem to have much time there between her announcement and your announcements that you were running. So why are you running for that seat?
Well, I feel really proud that I've gotten a lot of bills passed into law, big, bold reforms. I've gotten over a dozen bills in my term and a half in the Assembly signed into law by Governor Walker. And I'm really excited about, particularly, I would say, when we reelect Governor Walker, to have the opportunity to work with him in the Senate and to continue to pass these big, bold reforms. I think we will continue to have an opportunity to kind of rein in bureaucrats, rein in government, lower tax rates, improve our business environment. I think our business environment has improved dramatically in the last 7 years, and every ranking shows it. And as somebody in a border area, we see businesses all the time now moving across the river into Wisconsin. So I'm really proud of the work that we've done, but there's a lot more work to be done. And so I would look forward to the opportunity to doing that in the Senate.
Okay. So you had mentioned about working with the governor for bold reform. Is there any specific reforms that you would say, when I get in the Senate, I'm going to support this?
Yeah,
Anything specific?
There's a number of bills that I've co-sponsored this session. So one of them that I'm particularly excited about is called a regulation reform sunset bill. So right now, once a regulation is passed, it generally just stays on the books indefinitely. And so if you look at our statutes, the books are this high, and if you look at our regulations, they're way up over your head. And they just never go away, even if they were drafted in the 30s, 40s, 50s. So what this bill would do would have a review and an affirmative approval of regulations after some sunset period. And I think that's a huge win to take back a little bit of legislative power, the power of the people that represent the people, to actually make the laws. And I think that's the way that it was intended to be. And so that could be a big win. My friend Rob Staffschult is working with Senator Roth on a wetlands reform bill. So we see these wonderful, beautiful, pristine wetlands, and I'm an outdoorsman, a hunter, and we want to preserve those. But we also see things that are cow pastures and artificial ponds that were made when businesses were first created being called wetlands. And these are causing significant issues. People don't know this, but we're one of the only states that regulates what's called non-federal wetlands. These are small, isolated wetlands, the way that we regulate them. Almost no other state does what we do. And I'm proud that we do some of these regulations, but some of them are really getting in the way. Just an example, I was visiting a farm family that was trying to do an expansion on a 100-year-old farm up in Grantsburg a couple weeks ago. And all they wanted to do was expand their barn out. And when we went up there, and we actually brought the Deputy Secretary of the DNR up there with us to show him what we were talking about, it was actually fill from where they had put in a driveway that they had deemed was a wetland, and they couldn't even build over to that. And I think he was surprised when he saw what was being called a wetland. And so there are big reforms like that we can do that can significantly improve the business environment in Wisconsin.
Okay. So any other, this is a primary, and so what distinguishes you from your primary opponent, I guess? You're both obviously Republicans, and you're in your second term. He's in his first term, representing obviously slightly different areas. Shannon has also talked about regulation reform and being pro-business, obviously being a businessman from River Falls. But what would distinguish you from him?
A couple of things. So when I talked about the sportsman's issues, I'm really proud that I'm the only candidate in the race with a 100% rating from the National Rifle Association. I think that is one of the things that I've tried really hard to talk about, is that how important to me, and I think to the rest of the amendments in our Constitution, the Second Amendment is. And so that's one of the areas that I think distinguishes us. One of the other areas is really, if you look at Washington and the dysfunction that we have in Washington and why people are so irritated with Washington, is they don't get anything done. They don't pass legislation. I mean, I've been kind of a leader in trying to get the wolf delisted. Because northern Wisconsin is having a significant wolf issue, and this impacts the northern part of my assembly district, which is Sheila's Senate district. And we have a bill that's authored by Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson. There are no two politicians in Washington probably philosophically further apart than Tammy Baldwin and
That
Ron.
represent the same state.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And they can't get the bill passed. It's incredible to me that how dysfunctional Washington is. On the other hand, I've been able to get over a dozen bills passed that I've authored and signed into law by Governor Walker. And Shannon has really good ideas, but he hasn't gotten any bills done yet. And so I think what people are after right now is somebody who gets results. In passing legislation, even in a place like Wisconsin where we have the Assembly, the Senate, and the governorship, is still really hard. You have to work at it. You have to work with the stakeholder groups. You have to work with other legislators. You have to work with the folks that represent other groups in the Capitol to get these bills done. And that, I think, is what people expect. They expect that when you get elected, you're going to go to Madison and you're going to get results. And I've shown an ability to do that.
So you mentioned about getting the 100% rating from the NRA. So that's based on some type of survey that they send out.
Well, I think it's based on that, but not only that, on your voting record.
Okay.
In the legislature.
On the voting record in the legislature. All right. So I remember getting an A- rating when I signed mine, and the two that I said was that I would consider some regulation of was hand grenades and assault rifles. So I didn't get the 100% rating. But so basically, though, all NRA positions you agree with 100%.
Well, I don't know what all the NRA positions are, but I think what I would say is that I am a strong and steady advocate for the Second Amendment, and it would have to be something that would be pretty extraordinary for me to depart from my strong advocacy for the Second Amendment. And let me just give you an example of where this sometimes comes into play. So some of my Democrat friends last session proposed a bill that would have banned, and this is the truth, would have banned a lot of normal hunting rifles in Wisconsin. They called it an assault weapons ban. And the bill was so bad that they actually, after we jumped into it, and I jumped into that issue and made some noise about it, even some of the rural Democrats said, guys, what are you doing? And they pulled back on that bill. And I think that's where it's important, is to have that as a specific issue that you're interested in and that you'll fight for.
Right. I know because I'm on the school board and watch some education issues, I know that there was some push to introduce the ability for like teachers to carry guns and be able to have guns in schools. Is that something that you've looked at in the 2 terms that you've been in?
I don't recall that being a bill in Wisconsin, and maybe I've forgotten about it. I don't recall somebody specifically authoring a bill to have armed
Sometimes
teachers.
these are ideas and then they don't get either into drafting stage or they get discussed and committee chairman tell them don't introduce that bill because it's not going to come out. But
Well, I haven't seen that particular bill. The one bill that I have seen that is out there right now that I'm a co-sponsor of would fix an issue with our concealed carry law. So right now under the concealed carry law, if you have a concealed carry permit, you can have a weapon in your car and it can be loaded. And that's the way that a lot of concealed carry owners or holders carry their weapons. And if you go to drop your kids off at school, and even if you're in the parking lot, it's a problem. And so under this bill, what we call the constitutional carry, that would no longer be an issue. And I think that's important. And I think a lot of people don't understand that in Wisconsin, for a long time, it's been a constitutional right to wear a gun on your hip. And so concealed carry, it becomes an issue if you're wearing the gun on your hip and your shirt falls over your gun. Then all of a sudden it's a concealed weapon. And so the other thing that we fix is if your spouse gets into your car and they don't have the concealed carry permit,
okay.
Now they're no longer.
So some of this is introducing some common sense to certain
in my
regulations.
view, absolutely.
All right. Let's see, where was I going with the next question? All right, so we talked about regulation reform, the NRA. What is another area then that sets you apart? Oh, I know what I was going to ask you in follow-up, because you had mentioned about pointing out a Democrat's bill that you felt didn't make sense and was just wrong-headed. Are there examples where you've supported a Democrat-authored bill where you thought it did make sense?
Sure. I have worked across the aisle on a number of occasions. In fact, one of the things that I did this year that was pretty interesting is Evan Goyke, who's a Milwaukee Democrat, we did what we called a legislative exchange. So I spent a whole day down in Milwaukee with Representative Goyke, going to businesses and community functions in his district, so he would kind of understand, or I would understand a little bit more about his district. And then we had him up to the 28th, to my assembly district, and he spent a day with us going to visit the businesses that we have there. So he visited a farm with us. He visited a manufacturing facility with us. He visited one of the wineries that we have, and got a chance to sort of see firsthand some of the way that some of the regulations that I sometimes talk about impact the businesses in our district. So as I said earlier, Evan and I actually last session co-authored the new Partnership Act in Wisconsin, and we've
by partnership, you're talking about business partnerships.
Business partnerships, yep.
Okay.
So we co-authored that bill together, and got that passed and signed into law. And in the Senate, we had a Democrat author on one hand and a Republican author on the other hand, and I think we passed it with unanimous support. So I think there's a misperception, particularly in Wisconsin, that we don't do things in a bipartisan way, but new numbers just came out that shows that we passed 90% of the bills through the Assembly last session in a bipartisan manner. So
right. Well, the opioid epidemic legislation pieces, and there's seems like every session now there's something more on that tends to not get opposition.
And even on,
but how about the other 10% where there is a division? Is there ever a time where that anyone's ever broken rank, or is it just split down the partisan lines?
Well, on that 10%, that's where they're not bipartisan, right? So 90% of the bills pass bipartisan, and 10% pass on a partisan basis. And so I think there is a difference between the parties. There's a philosophical difference between the parties on some issues. And so it's not surprising to me that there are some issues where there are some partisan divisions, and I don't think that's necessarily bad, right? We can have civil debates and disagreements. I think it's when it gets into this.
You don't think it would be a good idea to pass the budget, for instance, with votes from both parties?
Sure, sure. But at the end of the day, you have to have parties that are willing to do that.
Right.
You know,
well,
and if you
except
look at
in Wisconsin, we had one party that was in control of both houses, and they couldn't get the budget passed in time, and it went 2 extra months. So, what is going to change? By having in the Republican case, it's 2 representatives moving from the Assembly to the Senate. How would that change? How would it change for you to move to the Senate, and then maybe Republicans, are they going to stop fighting about what they need to make for their priorities?
No, and we shouldn't stop. We should not stop having these debates. These are important debates. This is how we decide what public policy is going to be. This is how we decide how we're going to spend $76 billion taxpayer dollars. So the idea that we're not going to have debates, I think is wrong. I mean, we've had strong and significant debates in this country since our founding.
We've only got like a minute and a half left, so let's talk about that debate, because you voted against the governor's budget, being a Republican budget, and most of the Republicans voted for it. You were against it. So what parts of the budget were you against, other than just the overall spending level?
I mean, that was absolutely the biggest problem that I had, was the overall spending level grew government by over $3 billion. And we did it by adding a bunch of new tax collectors, dozens of new tax collectors. And so the Fiscal Bureau...
By tax collectors, what do you mean? You mean
new employees at the Department of Revenue who support auditors. And so these are people that the Legislative Fiscal Bureau scores as bringing in new revenue to Wisconsin. And the way I've termed it is because they're shaking down small business owners. So small business gets an audit. Well, guess what? The small business owner is also the HR director, is also the accountant, and they have to spend now weeks going through this audit, and it's really, really hard on them. Sometimes to find a few dollars, which may or may not have even been an error, but you're certainly not going to hire a CPA or a lawyer to fight the Department of Revenue. And so that's why I think it's a real problem. In the Assembly, a number of sort of Christmas tree items got added towards the end of the budget. One of them was this private authority that had the right to do eminent domain on people's property. And so a lot of those sort of special interest things that got added, I was opposed to. Thankfully, after we passed it through the Assembly, I voted against it, but a number of senators stood up and said, we will not vote for that unless the governor agrees that he's going to line item veto out a number of those items. So actually the budget got better, I think, after it passed out of the Assembly because the Senate made it better. And that's a place that I think
And
I
I'd
can
love
help.
to get into those specifics because I know of some examples where there was line items, but we've reached the end of our time. Anyway, we'll remind voters that the election is December 19th, and thank you, Representative Jarchow, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal.